My family forged my signature, stole my inheritance, and laughed when I walked in. The judge knew my name. My mother's laugh echoed off the marble walls like she'd already won. It was the kind of laugh she saved for people she considered beneath her, rich, unhurried, designed to carry. She didn't lower her voice when she leaned toward my brother and said it. She wanted me to hear. She'd always wanted me to hear. She's too pathetic to fight back. I heard every syllable. I set my folder on the plaintiff's table, pulled out my chair, and sat down without looking at either of them. My hands were folded. My breathing was even. My coffee that morning had been black, same as every morning for the past 2 years, because I'd learned somewhere around month 4 of building my case that if you let yourself get sentimental, even for a second, you start making mistakes. I wasn't going to make mistakes. Not today. My name is Victoria Owens. I was 25 years old, and for the past 24 months, I had been quietly, methodically, legally constructing the most thorough act of self-preservation anyone in my family had ever witnessed. They just didn't know it yet. The bailiff called the case number. I stood up, walked to my podium slow and measured. Tap, 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 my heels on marble. The only sound in the room that mattered. Then the judge looked up from his papers. He stopped. He leaned forward. Victoria Owens? Judge Randall Vance said. Something moved across his face. Surprise, recognition, warmth. Like running into someone unexpectedly in an airport after years apart. Is that really you? Behind me, my mother's laugh died mid-breath. My brother Julian whispered, low and urgent, Mom, how does he know her? She had no answer. Good. Let me take you back to the beginning, because that's where this really starts. Not in the courtroom, but in a small apartment in Columbus, Ohio, in the dead of February 3 years earlier, when I was 22 years old and eating ramen at a kitchen table covered in scholarship applications. I grew up in the Owens house on Sycamore Drive in a suburb outside of Cincinnati. Big colonial, 4 bedrooms. My father, Robert Owens, had built a modest but real estate empire over 30 years. Commercial properties, 2 residential complexes, a handful of retail strips. When he died of a cardiac event the summer I turned 18, he left behind a family trust worth approximately $2.4 million. Half to me, half to my brother Julian. That was the will. That was always the will. My mother, Eleanor Owens, née Hartwell, was the kind of woman who wore pearls to brunch and believed that a family's dignity was something you curated the way other people curated Instagram feeds. Carefully, constantly, and with ruthless editing of anything that didn't fit the frame. I didn't fit the frame. Julian was her project. 6'1", broad-shouldered, did 2 years of pre-law before dropping out and pivoting to investment consulting, which as far as I could tell meant he made phone calls and attended dinners on money that wasn't technically his yet. He wore suits that cost more than my monthly rent. My mother beamed at him like he was a lighthouse. I was the one she tolerated. Barely. The reasons were never entirely clear to me, not for a long time. I was quiet where Julian was loud. I studied where he coasted. I applied for scholarships while he drove the car my father had bought him. Looking back, I think Eleanor saw something in me that made her nervous. Some combination of my father's precision and my own stubborn refusal to perform the version of grateful that she wanted. I didn't perform. I just worked. The Vanguard Foundation scholarship changed my life in a way I didn't fully understand until much later. I'd applied in the spring of my senior year. It was a full academic merit award, tuition, room, board, a living stipend, attached to a business and finance degree at Ohio State. The panel was made up of 6 judges, 2 academics, 2 alumni donors, and 2 sitting legal professionals. One of them was Randall Vance, then still in private practice before his appointment to the bench. I was awarded the scholarship unanimously, summa cum laude candidate, before I'd taken a single class. The letter arrived at my parents' house on a Tuesday in April. I never saw it. My mother intercepted the mail. She told me 2 weeks later that I hadn't received it, that I should stop embarrassing the family by chasing things above my station and accept the community college admission that was more realistic. She said it the way she said everything, gently, conclusively, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I believed her. I was 18. I believed her. What she did with that letter and the 3 follow-up correspondence packets from the Vanguard Foundation, I wouldn't find out until I was 23, sitting across from a paralegal named Marcus Webb who had spent 11 years doing estate law and had what I can only describe as the most careful eyes I'd ever seen on a human being. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The summer after my supposed scholarship rejection, I scraped together enough for a semester at Columbus State, then another. I worked evenings at a hotel front desk and weekends at a restaurant that smelled permanently of fryer oil. I took every finance elective I could access. I talked my way into an audit of a statistics course I hadn't technically enrolled in. I read everything. What I didn't do was go home much. Eleanor had made it clear, in the particular language she used for these things, sighs, loaded silences, the way she tilted her head when she looked at me, that I was a disappointment. Julian reinforced this at every available opportunity. Family dinners became exercises in psychological endurance that I started declining around the time I turned 20. The trust money wasn't accessible to either of us until age 25. Our father had built in that delay deliberately. He'd told me once, when I was maybe 12, sitting on the back porch watching him water his tomato plants, money given before a person knows who they are is money wasted. I'd thought he was being philosophical. Turns out he was being prophetic. What I didn't know, what nobody told me, was that 2 years after my father died, Eleanor had begun quietly working with a man named Conrad Briggs, an estate attorney whose office was in Dayton and whose specialty, I would later learn, was helping wealthy widows wills, restructure family trusts in ways that required very creative paperwork. Conrad Briggs. Remember that name. Eleanor and Briggs had been meeting monthly, building something, and by the time I was 21, she had filed an amended trust charter with the county probate court, an amendment that removed my 50% inheritance entirely and redirected it to Julian. The signature on that amendment was mine, except I had never signed anything. I found out by accident. I'd been working at a small investment analysis firm in Columbus for about 8 months. Entry-level, grinding, learning things they don't teach in classrooms, when a coworker mentioned offhandedly that she'd just gotten a copy of her father's estate documents for a family meeting, and it had been weirdly easy to access online. Ohio probate court records are public. I looked up my father's trust on a Tuesday night at 11:14 p.m. at my kitchen table. I found the amendment at 11:22. I remember the exact feeling. It wasn't rage, not at first. It was more like the sensation of stepping off a curb you didn't see, that half second of weightlessness before you understand what's about to happen. My laptop screen blurred. I blinked. Read it again. The amendment was dated 18 months prior, filed properly, stamped, processed, and at the bottom, in what was supposed to be my handwriting, was a signature that looked almost like mine. Almost. I sat there for a long time. Then I closed the laptop, went to bed, and stared at the ceiling until 4 a.m. The next morning, I called Marcus Webb. Marcus had been referred to me by a woman at my firm who'd used him for a landlord dispute. He was 41, slightly rumpled in the way of men who are genuinely busy, rather than performatively so, and he had a habit of listening to everything you said before responding. Full stop, no interruptions, no nodding along. He just listened. I laid out what I'd found. I slid the printed amendment across his desk. He studied it for 4 minutes without speaking. When did you last sign any document relating to your father's estate? He asked. Never, I said. I was told there was nothing requiring my signature. He looked at me over his reading glasses. Who told you that? My mother. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word and wrote something on his legal pad. Then he looked up. I want to refer you to someone, he said. A forensic document examiner named Patricia Solano. She's worked expert witness testimony for 11 years. I want her to look at this signature. Patricia Solano had an office in a nondescript building on the east side of Columbus that smelled like copy toner and burnt coffee. She was 60-something, compact, with reading glasses perpetually perched in her silver hair, and she did not waste words. She examined the amendment signature alongside 3 genuine samples of my handwriting for 47 minutes. Her conclusion, typed on official letterhead, the signature on the amended Owens Family Trust Charter, Exhibit 3A, does not match the confirmed handwriting samples of Victoria R. Owens. Pressure inconsistencies, baseline deviation, and letter formation patterns indicate the signature was produced by a different individual attempting to replicate the subject's handwriting style. Forgery. My hands didn't shake when I read it. They went very, very still. Here's what I want you to understand about the next 18 months of my life. I didn't panic. I didn't call my mother screaming. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell Julian. I didn't even tell my closest friend Renata, who had known me since college and who would have lovingly told me to burn everything down immediately. I did not burn anything down. I built. Marcus connected me with a forensic accountant named Derek Wong, 20 years in financial compliance, formerly with the state attorney's office. Derek spent 6 weeks auditing every financial thread connected to my father's trust. What he found was a paper trail that would have been almost invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Disbursements to a holding company tied to Conrad Briggs, restructuring fees that didn't match any legitimate legal work, trust assets being repositioned in ways that funneled money toward Julian while creating the appearance of administrative maintenance. Derek's report was 63 pages, single-spaced. Meanwhile, Marcus filed a quiet records request with the Vanguard Foundation. I hadn't thought about the scholarship in 4 years. I'd buried it under layers of it just wasn't meant to be, and I'm doing fine anyway. The response came back in 10 days. The foundation had records showing I was awarded the scholarship unanimously. They had my acceptance packet, which they'd sent 3 times to my parents' address. They had follow-up correspondence. They had internal notes from the panel review describing me as the most outstanding candidate we've evaluated in 6 years, signed by the panel members, including Randall Vance. I read that packet sitting in Marcus's office and felt something crack open in my chest, something I hadn't even known was sealed. 4 years of telling myself I hadn't been good enough. 4 years of my mother's voice living in the back of my skull like a slow leak. All of it. Rot. I was good enough. I had always been good enough. She had simply hidden the proof. I cried exactly once for about 8 minutes in Marcus's small office bathroom. Then I washed my face, came back out, and said, "What do we do next?" Marcus looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him before, something close to admiration. "We build the rest of the case," he said, "and we wait. I want to tell you about the harassment campaign because that was the part where Julian nearly unraveled everything. It started about 14 months before the trial. Julian had somehow caught wind. I still don't know exactly how, whether Eleanor had a contact at the probate court or whether Conrad Briggs had a surveillance service, which sounds paranoid until you know these people, that I was asking questions. Nothing specific, just questions. The calls started at strange hours. The first one came at 2:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. Julian's voice slightly blurred at the edges the way it got when he'd been drinking, talking about how I needed to let this go and stop embarrassing the family before I got myself into something I couldn't handle. I recorded it. I recorded all of them. I had set up a call recording application on my phone 6 months prior, on Marcus's advice, on the theory that people like Julian tend to escalate, and escalation tends to be useful. He sent emails from 3 different addresses, thinking, I suppose, that I wouldn't connect them. One of them read, in full, sign the waiver, Victoria, or I swear to God I will make the rest of your pathetic life a living misery. I printed it, dated it, and added it to the folder. The voicemails got uglier. There was one from Eleanor too, softer, more surgical, suggesting that I was having a breakdown and perhaps needed professional support, and that it was so sad to see what I'd become. She managed to make it sound like concern. My mother had always been extraordinary at making cruelty sound like concern. I kept every single one. By the time Marcus had compiled the harassment documentation, we had 12 months of logs, 23 recorded calls or voicemails, and 41 documented written communications. Marcus organized them by date, nature, and escalation pattern. He referred me to a legal advocate named Serena Tate, who worked cases involving estate fraud and family coercion. Serena had a wall of commendations behind her desk and a way of speaking that was very quiet and very precise, like every word had already been considered from 6 angles before it left her mouth. They're going to file first, she told me, on a gray November morning 2 months before everything came to a head. The amended charter gives them standing to claim you've made fraudulent demands against the trust. They'll try to strip your creditor status before you can assert it. When? I asked. Weeks, maybe. If Briggs is advising them, he knows what he's doing. I nodded. Let them file. Serena looked at me the way Marcus sometimes did. You're not worried? I've been waiting for them to move first, I said. I needed them to. She almost smiled. Then let's make sure we're ready. They filed on a Thursday. Eleanor and Julian Owens, through Conrad Briggs, filed a civil lawsuit claiming that I had made fraudulent claims against the Owens family trust, had attempted to illegally contest a legitimately executed amendment, and had engaged in a pattern of harassment against family members. The harassment claim was almost funny. Almost. Serena filed our response within 48 hours. Then she filed a counterclaim that listed, in very clean legal language, the following: document forgery, financial fraud, trust tampering, and a pattern of targeted harassment and coercion, complete with exhibit references pointing to Derek Wong's forensic accounting report, Patricia Solano's handwriting analysis, and the full 12-month harassment log. When Eleanor's attorney received the counterclaim, I imagine the room got very quiet. Briggs tried to get it dismissed. The motion was denied. He tried to delay. The judge's clerk informed both parties that given the nature of the allegations, the case would proceed on the scheduled docket, and the scheduled docket meant Judge Randall Vance. I didn't know that until I got the case assignment. When Marcus called to tell me, there was a pause on the line before he said the name, like he was waiting for my reaction. I was quiet for a moment. The scholarship panel judge, I said. Yes. The one whose name is on my award certificate. Yes. I exhaled slowly. Marcus, I said, that's not a coincidence. That's a chapter ending. The morning of the trial, I was up at 5:30 a.m. I made coffee. I ironed the jacket I'd chosen specifically because it was the same shade of deep navy as the folder I'd be carrying. Professional, controlled, exactly what I wanted the jury of this courtroom to see when they looked at me. I reviewed my documents for the last time, not because I needed to, but because it was a ritual by then. Every page in order, every exhibit tabbed. Patricia Solano's handwriting analysis. Exhibit A. Derek Wong's forensic accounting report. Exhibit B. The amended trust charter with my forged signature. Exhibit C. The Vanguard scholarship certificate. Gold seal intact, my name in elegant embossed print. Exhibit D. The full harassment log, organized and annotated by Serena Tate. Exhibit E. And in the very back of the folder, something I'd saved for last. Something I hadn't even shown Marcus until 3 days prior. The deed. After the Vanguard scholarship, the one my mother had buried, the one I'd never received, I'd spent 5 years doing it the long way. Columbus State, then a transfer admission to Ohio State, then the business and finance degree, graduated with distinction, then entry level at the firm, then 2 promotions in 3 years, then a position in investment banking that paid in the 3rd year, a bonus that I used, every cent of it, no celebrations, no vacations, just one calculated move to purchase a 3-unit residential rental complex on Birch Street in Columbus. Cash transaction. The deed was registered solely in my name. I owned it outright. I had for 8 months. I hadn't told anyone. My mother had told everyone I was a failure for 7 years. She'd just forgotten to check. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:50 a.m. I walked through the metal detector, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and pushed open the heavy courtroom door. They were already there. Julian in his expensive suit, charcoal, double-breasted, bought with money that should have been half mine. Eleanor in pale gray, pearls at her throat, back straight, the picture of composed maternity. Conrad Briggs beside her, 60s, silver-haired, watching the room the way lawyers do when they think they own it. When I walked in, Julian said something to my mother that I couldn't hear. She laughed, not a quiet laugh, a loud one, deliberate. She wanted the bailiff to hear it. She wanted me to hear it. She's too pathetic to fight back. I found my table, set down my folder, sat. I said nothing. That was my first move. The bailiff called our case. I stood, walked to the podium. The folder in my hands was perfectly steady. Tap, tap, tap. Judge Randall Vance looked up from his papers and stopped. He leaned forward in the way people do when something catches them completely off guard. Not dramatically, but genuinely genuinely, the way surprise actually looks on a person's face before they have time to compose it. "Victoria Owens?" he said. "Is that really you?" The gallery was small, a few court observers, the clerk, Serena Tate at my elbow, but the silence that followed that question had weight to it. Behind me, my mother's laugh was gone, just gone. Julian's voice dropped to a hiss. "Mom, how does he know her?" She didn't answer. Judge Vance straightened. His expression settled back into professional neutrality, but something remained in his eyes, recognition and a kind of quiet attention. "Welcome to my courtroom, Miss Owens. I see you've gone and made something of yourself." Julian actually let out a short laugh, a reflex. He couldn't help it. "Excellence? Her?" Judge Vance looked at him. It was not a long look. It didn't need to be. Julian went quiet like someone had reached over and turned a knob. Briggs opened for the plaintiff. He was polished, measured, built his argument on the language of the amended charter. Legitimately filed, properly executed. Victoria had made no objection at the time of filing. Her current claims were belated and retaliatory. He used phrases like baseless challenge and emotionally motivated dispute. I sat and listened to the whole thing. When it was my turn, I opened the folder. "Your Honor," I said, "I'd like to introduce Exhibit A, Patricia Solano's forensic analysis." I walked the judge through her credentials, her methodology, her conclusion. Vance read the report carefully, line by line. His face didn't change, but his jaw set. Exhibit B, Derek Wong's 63-page accounting report. I summarized the key findings: the disbursements, the restructuring fees, the shell company tied to Conrad Briggs. I watched Briggs across the room stop writing on his legal pad. Exhibit C, the amended charter, the forged signature. Judge Vance held it up, looked at Exhibit D, the scholarship certificate, my actual documented signature in the panel's records, and placed them side by side. The courtroom was absolutely silent. "This," Vance said slowly, looking at the two documents, "is not Victoria Owens's handwriting." A wave of whispers moved through the gallery. Eleanor's face did something I had never seen it do. It lost color, not dramatically, not in a movie way, but in the flat, specific way of someone watching a wall they built begin to move. Julian's fists hit the table. "We did what we had to do." His voice cracked on the words like the composure he'd borrowed for the day had hit its limit. "She abandoned this family. She never came to anything. She never contributed, and she deserves nothing." "Mr. Owens," Judge Vance said very quietly, "sit down before I hold you in contempt of this court." Julian sat. Briggs put a hand on Eleanor's arm. She was already shifting gears. I could see it. She had a particular internal system, my mother. When one angle failed, she moved to another without pause, the way a chess player who's lost a piece simply recalibrates. "Victoria," her voice softened. She turned to face me directly, which she hadn't done since I walked in. "I know you're angry. I understand that, but I need you to think about your brother's future, about what you're doing to this family. You have a good life, clearly. You don't need this money. Why destroy everything your father built over a misunderstanding? A misunderstanding. 12 years of being told I wasn't good enough. Scholarship letters intercepted and buried. A forged signature on a legal document. 18 months of threatening phone calls at 3 a.m. A misunderstanding. I didn't blink. I didn't look away from Judge Vance. I reached into the back of my folder. Exhibit E, the harassment log. "Your Honor," I said, "I'd like to enter the final exhibit." I submitted the compiled harassment documentation. Every call, every voicemail, every email, dated and sourced and annotated by Serena Tate in language that made the pattern unmistakable. Julian's escalating threats. Eleanor's more surgical interventions. The attempt to frame me as mentally unstable. The explicit demand that I sign a financial waiver. Judge Vance read through the summary. He picked up the transcript of one specific call. He read it aloud. "Sign the waiver, Victoria, or I swear to God I will make the rest of your pathetic life a living misery." The room held its breath. Julian had gone pale, not guilty pale. The specific pale of a person who has just remembered, in real time, every choice that led to this moment and understood, for the first time, that those choices had receipts. "Your Honor," I said, "I'm not here for the trust money." Vance looked up. "I'm asking the court for 3 things." I set down the folder. "A restraining order against both Julian Owens and Eleanor Owens, barring any contact with me. Legal severance from both parties in all familial and financial contexts. And a freeze on the Owens family trust pending a full state fraud investigation, including examination of Conrad Briggs's involvement in the amended charter and any associated financial transactions." Briggs was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor, that's—" "Sit down, counselor." Vance didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You'll have time." He set down the transcript. He looked at the room, at Julian, at Eleanor, at Briggs, at me. He was a man who had spent years watching people in courtrooms, who had learned to read them the way some people read weather. The gavel came down. Bang. The restraining order was granted. The fraud investigation referral was filed with the state attorney's office within the week. Conrad Briggs, I later learned through Serena, surrendered his law license before the investigation was 6 weeks old. The Owens family trust was frozen, its assets placed under court-appointed oversight. The amendment was vacated. The original 50% inheritance structure was restored, pending the outcome of the criminal fraud proceedings, which were ongoing as of the time I'm writing this. My mother cried at the table when the gavel came down. Real tears, I think. Though with Eleanor, I've never been entirely certain where performance ends and genuine feeling begins. She collapsed against the wood, and I watched it happen, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not exactly. Relief. relief, the specific, exhausted relief of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time. Julian stared at me as I picked up my folder. His eyes were hollow and furious and searching, looking for something in my face. Anger, guilt, triumph, anything he could use. He found nothing useful because I had stopped performing for my family a long time ago. I zipped the folder, turned toward the exit. Tap, tap, tap. I was 3 steps from the courtroom doors when a court officer stepped in front of me, hand raised, expression careful. Miss Owens. His voice was quiet, professional. I need to ask you to remain for a moment. There's a state investigator here. He glanced back toward the table where my mother was still seated, Briggs talking quietly into her ear. It appears, the officer said, that your family isn't the only one they've done this to. I stood very still. Then I set my folder back on the nearest surface and said, tell them I'm ready. The investigator's name was Lena Marsh. She was mid-40s, direct, and had an expression that suggested she had seen too many things to be easily surprised. She interviewed me in a small room off the main corridor for 40 minutes. She had a list of names, 6 other families who had used Conrad Briggs for estate work in the past decade and had experienced anomalies in their trust documents. 6 families. I thought about all the people who hadn't been lucky enough to have a forensic accountant, a document examiner, and a scholarship judge sitting on the bench on the right day. All the people who'd simply accepted what they'd been told because they believed the people who were supposed to love them. I gave Lena Marsh everything she asked for, in whatever order she wanted it, for as long as she needed. Outside, through the small window in the upper corner of the room, I could see the Columbus skyline. The building where I'd worked my first finance job was visible if you knew what to look for. A gray tower, third from the left. I'd eaten lunch on its front steps more times than I could count in my first year, when I still didn't know whether any of this would work out, but it had. It's been 14 months since the trial. The Birch Street property is fully occupied, all 3 units. Property management handles the day-to-day. It generates monthly income that I reinvest with discipline my 22-year-old self would find unrecognizable and probably encouraging. I had dinner with Renata last month. She made me tell the whole story again, from the beginning, and at the part where Judge Vance said my name across the courtroom, she slammed her hand on the table and scared the table next to us. I still think about my father sometimes, his tomato plants, the back porch, what he said about money and knowing yourself. I think he would have understood what I did. I think he would have been proud of the patience more than anything else. The long, deliberate patience of someone who waited until the moment was exactly right. My mother called me once, 2 months after the trial, from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave one. The trust fraud investigation is ongoing. Lena Marsh emails me occasionally with updates. Careful legal language, nothing she can't commit to. But the tone of the emails tells me what she can't say directly. Conrad Briggs is cooperating with prosecutors. Julian, I hear, has moved in with a friend and is reassessing his career path. This information came to me secondhand, and I have not sought to verify it, because Julian Owens is no longer a person whose circumstances I track. Eleanor, as far as I know, still wears her pearls. Some things don't change, but a courtroom will strip away a lot of the rest.